I have been writing for about 15 years. I've published over 40 books. I am self-published. I firmly believe that indie publishing, just like indie music, is all very important to get out there and not be censored by what somebody else decides that we should or shouldn't read. I leave that up to the readers. So just a little bit about what we're going to hear about today. I did bring a trilogy. It's about three sisters based in Vermont, and I drafted these driving from Boston to Vermont to see my dad, actually, with my daughter in the passenger seat copiously taking notes for me. And so that's how this little trilogy came to be. Also, my family is from Scotland, so there is a tie into Scotland because I love everything about Scotland. And then I brought my cozy mysteries just because it's more of a diverse group, and we'll talk a little bit about what cozy mystery really is about. They are murder mysteries. This particular series does have a witch and a whole bunch of magical characters running around. All good stuff. Think, Bewitched, who not like, Agatha or whatever. What was her mother's name again? I can't remember. But good stuff. So I'm going to do a little reading. If you have questions, you don't have to wait for me to stop. I'm very happy to answer any questions at any time. And I'm from Great Barrington, so I'm local. So if Michelle wants to bring me back and talk about anything else, we can certainly do that too. Okay? Yeah. So, with no further ado, I'm going to read from Old and New. And again, as I said, this is about three sisters, and they are happily independent, and they do not need any man in their life to take care of them. They just want to live their own life and be happy. And they grew up in a very close-knit family. So this is kind of like my daughters, who are very independent and close-knit, although I only have two, not three. And so I'm going to read about this. And if you enjoy my books, you can look at my website. I have a couple of free books on there that you can download. And just, unfortunately, you have to be plugged in to read those. They're not unplugged. And sometimes I read too fast, so I'm going to read very slowly. Thud. Jamie slammed the door behind her, shutting out the biting cold. The silence embraced her as she entered the quaint cottage. A familiar ache wrapped around her heart. This was home, but she was alone. Kicking off black, high-heeled boots, she walked in stocking feet to the mantel, flipping a switch to the gas fireplace whooshed to life. She held her hands out toward the fire and rubbed them together, absorbing the warmth. Welcome home, Jamie. She wandered into her bedroom and changed into yoga pants, a well-worn fisherman knit sweater, and plush, heavy socks, perfect for hanging out in the house. The back door chimed. Must be the girls. Come in, she called down the hallway. Jamie, where are you hiding? Kenzie shouted. In the bedroom. Be right out. Is Grace with you? She's right behind me. Jamie walked into the hallway, her smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. What's going on? Grace came bopping through the door, clear blue eyes dancing. Jamie tugged at a curl that escaped from Grace's bun. I'm happy to see my sisters. The sisters were exactly 11 months apart, Scottish triplets. Each sister was born on the 11th month, Jamie in May, Kenzie in April, and Grace in March. They had the same crystal blue eyes and chestnut hair, but that's where their similarities ended. Jamie was tall and willowy, and her long hair fell in thick waves around her shoulder. Kenzie was vertically challenged and athletic, and her short, spiky hair suiting an active lifestyle. Grace, the baby, was average height, and her figure was curvy like her bouncy curls. It's about time you got here, Grace. I'm starving. Kenzie grabbed the 2 paper bags out of Grace's arms and hurried to the kitchen. Over her shoulder, she said, Hey, I thought Jamie was buying tonight. Grace shoved off her long-tailored black coat and tucked the butter-soft pink leather gloves and pink beret into the side pocket and hung it next to Kenzie's deep blue pea coat. She tugged on the bobby pins, holding her hair secured in a bun, letting her curls bounce free. Closing her eyes, she sighed, Oh, that feels good. She tousled the curls in place. I volunteered to pick it up. Glancing at the counter and then at Jamie, she smirked, Is there wine? Jamie's eyebrow arched. She smiled in response. But of course, and pointed to the kitchen. Help yourself, there's white in the fridge. Kenzie rummaged through the wine rack, victoriously thrust the bottle in the air. I'm opening the Merlot. Pour me a glass too? Jamie asked. And Grace echoed the request. Jamie sniffed appreciatively. My gosh, that lo mein's making my mouth water. She rummaged in the second bag. I hope you got extra dumplings. The sisters quickly filled their plates in the wine glasses. Settling into the deep cushions in front of the crackling fire, plates resting on the square wooden coffee table, the girls held up their glasses. Cheers! Kenzie twirled noodles around her fork and shifted her gaze to Jamie. Your text said a box from Scotland arrived. Jamie's shoulders slumped and she munched on a slice of bread. I got an email from Mom. She and Dad are cleaning out some of Gran's things and found it. I guess it was addressed to us. I thought it would be better to open it together. Kenzie looked between her sisters, her smile pained. It's hard to believe she's gone. Jamie wiped away a lone tear. I keep expecting the phone to ring and hear Gran asking when we're hopping on the next plane. Guys, fighting back tears, Grace's face sagged. Can we concentrate on what's in the box? It hurts too much to talk about Gran's death. Kenzie wiped away the tears that slipped down her cheeks. Grace is right. Let's open the box and see what's inside after we finish this amazing lo mein. The girls bounced ideas around on what might be in the box until dinner was finished. Grace stood up and whisked away the empty plates. She called over her shoulder, I'll grab the wine if someone can get the box. You know how much I hate waiting to open any kind. Jamie went in search of scissors and pointed to the closet. Ken's, the box is in there. Kenzie opened the door and carefully carried the box to the coffee table as if it contained something irreplaceable. Jamie returned and said, her hand hovering over the tape, Here goes nothing. Grace came in holding the bottle of wine. Be careful, sissy. It was Gran's, so it's really old. Jamie held her breath as she cautiously swiped through the layers of packing tape and eased open the cardboard flaps. Standing on tiptoes, Kenzie peered over her shoulder. What is it? Jamie withdrew a cream-colored envelope. It's a letter. Grace reached around to pull back the bubble wrap and Jamie touched her hand. Wait! We should read it first, and then we'll see what's inside. Kenzie stretched out her hand. I'll read it. She slid open the wax seal and pulled out several pieces of stationery. Glancing down, she said, I don't remember Gran's handwriting so spiderweb-like. This might take a while. Grace leaned in and studied the page. I don't think it's Gran's. What if it's great-Gran's? You know, Dad's grandmother? Jamie admonished, if we stop talking and let Ken's read, I bet we'll find out. She picked up her wine glass and settled back on the sofa cushions. My dearest granddaughters, this is your father's grandmother writing to you long before you were even a gleam in his eye, or even before he had any interest in lassies. If you receive this box, it means that I've had the joy of seeing my beloved daughter, your grandmother, again. I'm sorry for your loss and hope your memories of her will sustain you through the years to come, and her wisdom will guide you. I assume you have a box from your gran. Have you looked inside? If not, carefully unwrap the contents and lay the 3 items I chose for you on a table. Should I stop or should I keep going? Okay. Jamie's eyes grew wide as she looked at her sisters. What the hell, is she psychic or something? Grace clapped a hand over her mouth. Remember Gran said the women in our family were special? Maybe that's what she's talking about. Kenzie's eyebrows shot up. That would explain a few things about Gran. She always seemed to have eyes on us all the time. Absent-mindedly, Jamie tapped the glass with her finger. Do you remember the time? I must have been around 10. We decided to get up early and go fishing. And when we got to the bottom of the stairs, Gran was dressed and waiting for us. I know we never talked about sneaking off while we were in the house where she could hear us. You're right. Grace let out a rush of breath. Our sneaky plans were always hatched under that old willow tree near the creek. Kenzie gasped. Oh, wow. That does make me wonder about all kinds of things. Jamie waved her hands toward the box. That's enough speculating about Gran being able to read our minds. Let's see what's inside. Taking care not to rush, Grace took a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. She pulled back the paper and cut the bubble wrap inside. to discover a carved wooden box. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Should I open it? Hold on, let's see what Kenzie has. Kenzie withdrew a large floppy basket wrapped in tissue paper with a deep green satin ribbon. She pulled back the paper, revealing a large piece of wool, a Scottish tartan. Is this the Macmillan plaid? She carefully placed it on the back of the sofa. Jamie and Grace nodded, eager to see the third item. One item left, Jamie. Your turn. Kenzie slid the box in front of her older sister. She pulled out an identical-looking package tied with the same ribbon. Do you think it's another plaid? Maybe a cape. She tugged the bow and eased back the tissue paper. Oh my gosh, it's a wedding dress. Awestruck, Grace reached out and fingered the silky fabric. Do you think it was Great-Grand's? Jamie's voice softened. It must have been. Look at the style. The simplicity of the cut is definitely vintage. The fabric feels like silk. She turned the dress over, and look at the laces on the back. That must have been how it was secured. Jamie held it up to look closer. These eyelets look to be hand-sewn. It must have taken hours, and the needlework is exquisite. Kenzie picked up the letter. Let's see what Great-Grand has to say about it. Wait, what's in the little box? Grace pried open the top and unfolded a square of the same silky fabric as the dress. Nestled inside was a large brooch. She held it up to the firelight. Look, it's a thistle, and I wonder if the stone is an amethyst. Grace turned it over in her hand. It's stunning, she said. Kenzie's eyes were drawn back to the letter. She began to read. Now that you have the plaid, the dress, and the brooch unpacked, it's time for you to know what this means. When I was young, I was convinced I would never marry. I was rapidly approaching spinsterhood. I was fine with not having a husband or a family for a while. But there did come a day where I longed to have a man to share my life with and raise a family. One day, while I was preparing a meal for my parents, I had a vision of 3 lovely young women, Jamie, Kenzie, and Grace. I didn't tell anyone, but I knew deep in my heart that you were my legacy. I have to keep reading because this is just the best part, I think, of this book is this opening. Grace hit her hand on the table with a thud. I knew it. Gran was a psychic. Jamie felt goosebumps crawl over her arms. Annoyed, Kenzie looked over the top of the page. Can I continue? Grace sank back in the pillows and sulked. Sure, don't let me stop you. After my vision, I wondered if I would marry and have a family. The next day, I went to an old, wise woman who lived in our village. I told her what I had seen and asked, how can my blood flow in the veins of these young women I saw when I'm not betrothed? The old woman asked me to fetch her sewing basket. Of course I did. When I handed it to her, she dug to the very bottom and pulled out a large spool of ivory silver thread. She handed it to me and told me to purchase the finest fabric I could find and make a wedding dress, but only to use this thread. Once it was complete, put the dress on and look into a mirror. If I did as she instructed, the man who was meant to be my husband would find me. I was skeptical. However, the image of 3 lovely young women began to appear in my dreams. I made the dress you have in your possession. I followed the instructions exactly. I wore the dress one time after it was complete, as a woman without a man to marry. My parents thought I was touched with fever, but I was compelled to do this. Our family legacy depended on it. I guess by now you figured out I did marry. His name was James Mackenzie. He was a good man and a good father, and we were blessed with 1 daughter. Your Gran, Arabelle, was hesitant to marry. She felt there wasn't a man to live up to her standards. On her 18th birthday, I implored her to don my wedding dress. She did, and later that year she fell in love and married Rory McClellan. As you know, he was your great-grandfather. Kenzie looked up from the top of the page. Did you know any of this, Jamie? She shook her head, fighting to keep her voice steady. I know some of the names, but nothing about the dress. Keep reading. That leads me to you, my beautiful great-granddaughters, in your current situation. Each of you is unmarried. Grace sucked in a breath. What is she, a witch? Jamie laughed, breaking the tension. Remember, she said she could see the future, but I don't think she was a witch. Kenzie's voice cut through the giggles. Hey, you two, let me finish. As my last request to my daughter Arabelle, I had her take the brooch my dear husband gave me on our wedding day, the McClellan family plaid from Rory McClellan, and the wedding dress that was worn by 2 of your ancestors, and store it in a chest with instructions the items be sent to you upon Arabella's death. It is time for each of you to try on this dress. As long as the original seams are untouched, this dress will continue to hold the magic of love and hope for the future in each stitch. Although we have never met, I have great love for you, my granddaughters, the daughters of my beloved grandson James. Be brave, my lovely. I'm always with you. Your great-grandmother Anne. So much more to come in this book. But basically, and I can come back and read more from this if you like, or if you want to hear more about cozies. But basically, the 3 sisters each have to try the dress on, and each book is about their story, their individual story, taking into account their own personalities, their own drive. They're all very different, and it's their discovery that letting people into their life doesn't mean that they have to give up who they are, that their partner should complement them and not overtake them. So there's a lot more that's going to happen, and you really need to take them out of the library and read them. So does anybody have any questions about this trilogy before I move into read a little bit from the cozies world?
I have a question about believing in something like this. Have you had any incident in your life where something mystical or magical has happened? Is that what has prompted this?
Actually, what prompted this was my mother.
Oh.
When my granddad I was little, like 3 or 4, and my parents lived in Massachusetts, and my grandparents lived in Vermont, in northern Vermont. Like, as my daddy used to say, you could pipe in daylight. They were so far north. Mm-hmm. Okay. So when my mom knew that my grandfather was very sick, they were rushing to get to Vermont so that she could say goodbye. And so she woke up, and he was standing at the foot of her bed, and he told her not to rush, that he was already gone.
Oh, wow.
And so she went back to sleep. She woke up at the normal time, packed up me and my brothers, and we drove to Vermont. And of course, my granddad had passed at that time. So there's always been things in my life that have happened, like stop the car, and narrowly missing a tragic car accident with my daughters inside. So those kind of things have always happened to me. And I just believe that family love doesn't die when people do. I think it lives on and it resonates, especially in items that are heirloom items. Mm-hmm. I think that when we get things, like I have an old violin of my granddad's, and I have his chair. That's the only thing I really remember about him, is that wooden chair and sitting with him in that chair as a little girl. And I just think that having that in my home brings part of his energy and his goodness, because he was such a sweet man. I think that all stays with certain things that we treasure as family. So long answer for...
No, that was a nice answer.
So that's why kind of like magic and these types of feelings, I think, seep into my book because they're just a part of our family. Mm-hmm. And I think that when people pass on, love doesn't die. It just stays with us. Right. So that's why these books were written based in Vermont, because that's where we're from. And family lore is very important, and Scotland's very important to us. And interesting thing, though, about the plaid, funny story. I've got it on this cover. I changed covers, which we do as authors from time to time. Sorry, Joe, I'm moving. But I'm coming back to center. So when I was writing this book, and I had designed this plaid in the book, it wasn't a traditional plaid. Mm-hmm. And I was scrolling on Pinterest, which is a horrible thing to do when you're trying to get ideas because you can get overwhelmed. But I came across a dress designer, Joyce Young, based in the UK. And she had, and it's hard to see on the back of this, but this is the wedding gown that she had designed. You can see a little bit of it here. And that was the plaid that I had written about already in the book. It was kismet. So me being a baby author, I loved that dress and I wanted that book on the cover for Grace's book. So I emailed her. I figured she's a woman entrepreneur. She has her own company, her own design company. And so I asked her if I could purchase the license for this photo because they're professional photography. And being in my former life, I understood about rights and you just couldn't use them. And she graciously said, you can just use the picture. She gave me permission to use her design. I gave her credit in the book, but she gave me that permission to use that because it's women supporting women. And I was just overwhelmed by how gracious she was. And so, yeah.
So you had never seen that?
I had never seen that dress before. It was here, and then in Pinterest, and it's like, oh, that's my plaid. That's the dress. That was everything. And it's like, this was just so, emailing Ms. Young was just like a shot in the dark. I never in a million years thought she would ever say yes. And she did. So, yes. And so I sent her a copy of the trilogy so that she could have them, But yes. So
what was your first book that you ever did?
My first book I wrote is called Lost and Found. It's a series that's set over in the Albany, New York area about a small family. Carrie was a widow and she raised her 3 children on her own, and she had put all her energy into raising her family. She started a business when her husband Ben died, a little bakery in town called What's Perkin. And her kids are all grown and they're like, Mom, you have to start dating. You're just staying home. And she's like, no, I'm fine. And she's driving home in this terrible storm, and she gets to their house, and this huge tree that she and Ben planted when they bought the house fell on top of their sunroom and destroyed their sunroom. And so she calls her son, and she's like, I have this tree on. He owns a tree company. So he comes over, and they tarp the house, and the neighbor comes over, Ray. And Ray had a son who was their friend. So they all kind of grew up. They kind of co-parented together as friends and neighbors, and really wholesome small town stuff, like what life used to be, I think, a lot of times in neighborhoods. And so Ray said, I'll give you an estimate. I'll help you fix the house, get it all situated. And the one thing in the sunroom that didn't get damaged was her piano and pictures of the family. She had a grand piano. But Ben used to come and talk to her, and say, like, he was trying to encourage her, like, move on, you can't live half a life anymore. Yes, you've built this business. You've taken care of our children. It's your time. So eventually, spoiler alert, she falls in love with Ray. And Ray's ex-wife comes back and tries to kill him, and they won't tell each other, that they really do love each other and that they care for each other and that they're there for each other until this terrible tragedy happens. And so that's a series about the McKenna family. I have a thing for, nicknames, McClellan and McKenna. So that's a series about that, and each person in that series gets their own book, and it's not just romance. There's some women's fiction elements.
None of it's based on a true story.
Well, Lost and Found is because when I met my late husband, I had gone on 13 bad first dates. 13. 13. And I had known my now late husband for like 20 years before this. And I said to him one day, I said, he was just a really great guy. I said, can't you just clone yourself for me? And he's like, you don't want to date me. And I'm like, no, but somebody like you that's nice and respectful and, isn't judgmental and just hardworking, kind of guy. I said, those are all the qualities I'm looking for. He's like, nah. So, fast forward, things happen. We started dating, we got married, but I put, can I clone you? And the 13 bad dates. And I actually put one of the bad dates in that book because it was so horrible. I went out with this guy who shall remain nameless, but we were sitting there at lunch, and all he's doing is like this with his mustache. And then he says, like, what do you want to eat? And he says, and aren't you buying? And it's like, no, you asked me out, And so, yeah, I went on 13 very bad dates. And another bad date showed up in that book where I met this guy at Panera for coffee. And he says, wow, you don't look anything like he says, I thought you would be better looking or something like that. And I said, well, you don't look anything like your picture because you're only 20 in that picture apparently, and you're 60. So, So, yeah, so internet dating was tough. So Carrie does some internet dating and finds out how bad it really is. And so she's like, I'm done. And that's when she starts to date Ray. And that's kind of what happened in my life. I was done. I started to date my husband. We eventually got married. Unfortunately, I lost him 3 years ago. So, there's that. But yeah, so part of my life does slip into these books. I don't think I would be an authentic author if part of me didn't go into each book a little bit, just because of life experiences. And like there are many times, not when I write these books because they're not, well, this book I cried in when I was writing. But a lot of times when I'm writing like these type of books, and the fact that I could get through Grant's letter without crying, I really had to work hard at not crying with that, because again, this great grandmother, she's looking at her great granddaughter's futures, and I often wonder about, like who is going to be down my line, and so I do get emotional, and so I can cry at commercials. Well, let's just call a spade. But oftentimes when I'm writing, especially a romance, I will cry when I'm writing, and so if I'm crying, that means that I'm going to touch the reader, or if I'm laughing, it should resonate, it should come across in the book to somebody else who's reading it. So I really do strive to put all those emotions in it, and just enough of me that nobody's ever going to really know if you read the book, but now you guys will, and now they will, who's ever watching this. But yeah, so I think that that's important as an author.
So why do you write cozy? I mean, you say when I first, you say there's no violence, there's no this. It's just your persona, or why do you write?
Why do I write cozy mystery?
Yeah.
First books I ever read that I could really remember that I devoured in one summer was the entire Nancy Drew series. And I still have my copies, and I still have the cookbook, and I still have something else, so I have them all on my bookshelf waiting for a grandchild that wants to read them, because, I think they're awesome. So there's a mystery to that, but they're not violent. They're not graphic. And so then I moved on from Nancy Drew. I moved on to Agatha Christie, and I love Agatha Christie. I mean, talk about, the grande dame of writing any sort of mystery.
Does that have a little violence in it? Who would do this? I'm just curious.
I kill somebody off in every single book. At least one person. Sometimes two. I've had an occasion where I've killed two off.
Excuse me. So did you know that Agatha Christie had her own mystery when she disappeared for a while?
Yes.
Her husband had left her?
Yes. She was gone for several weeks, wasn't she?
Yes.
And she went to that resort?
Yeah.
Yes. I read that.
She ended up marrying somebody else, but there's a whole mystery of her.
Where did she go?
She lived on the island and then came back. It's based on the truth.
It is based on truth. I actually have her memoir that my daughter got me for Christmas 2 years ago. So I'm a huge Agatha fan. And actually one of my compliments that I got from a reviewer was Agatha Christie with a witch. So I was like, oh, talk about fangirling. That was like, and I didn't know this person. It's like, oh my gosh, I love that. But with cozy mystery, the genre is kind of specific. Like you have to kill somebody off in the first 2 chapters, or you have to kidnap somebody. You have to have something going on, but you're not going to show the actual murder. You're going to have a dead body. There's going to be all kinds of clues laying around, but it's not graphic. It's not James Patterson. It's not Lee Child with Jack Reacher. You're not watching anybody commit the murder. This is more about red herrings, which are clues and misdirection of clues throughout the storyline. So, and I write books by the seat of my pants. I can't plot a book to save my soul. I've tried. And all I did was get myself tied up in knots, and it was a horrible, horrible attempt. And I threw that out, and I just started from scratch. Where literally, I start with a Word document, which has the chapter numbers down, and my word counts on the left-hand side, and I just start writing. And I just write until it's done. And I throw in things, and I have a spreadsheet going. And so I add the clues, or I add things that I think are going to be important, like on this other document, because cozy mystery readers are such avid fans that if you miss, and if you haven't tied up a clue or a red herring, they will email you and they will tell you, you missed this, or why was this here? It never led anywhere. And in this particular series, even though each book begins and ends, and you can read just one book and you're fine, it's a satisfying read, I've been building the series to this conclusion, and I've been dropping these little clues that something's coming. And my editor actually said in this book, she sent me a letter, an email, and she said, there's a little problem. You say this, but you never wrap it up. And I said, that's intentional. I said, it's going to be resolved in book 12. And she said, have you written book 12? And I said, well, yes, I have. That's how I know it's going to be resolved. So, but with the cozies, it's not graphic violence. So you can be 12 years old and read this book, and it's probably a lot less violent than a video game.
So you just mentioned there, she saw, so people expect to see, what's going to be next book, who's going to answer my question. They expect that.
Cozy Mysteries are avid, rabid fans. They want to keep reading in a series. In fact, I thought that number 12 was going to be the last book in this series, and I just sent out my newsletter, and I said, I think this is going to be the last book in the series, and what do you think? And I got a flood of email back, because I have a very high open rate, thank goodness, on my newsletter, and they're like, no, and the editor sent me back, because she's already finished with Weddings and Wands, which is book 12, and she's like, I need to know what happens next. And I'm like, it's a satisfying conclusion. And she said, yes. She says, but where could you take it? And I'm like, well, I know where I could go. I mean, I've already thought about that. But yeah, I haven't decided, because I'm writing a spin-off series from this called, it's a dress designer series. The first book is Ghost and Gowns. And my character Lily from this book, who's the witch, and her best friend Nikki, actually go to the dress shop. They appear in there. And then I have another spin-off series called Robin's Point, where a character, Dax, from this series moves there. He becomes the police chief there. So I'm kind of tying everything together. So things could continue to percolate in Pembroke Cove, but I think readers are really going to want the next book in the bookstores.
So you said you don't plot things out.
No.
You know where this is going. So would you write yourself some outline notes?
No.
You don't forget?
I dream in chapters, and I remember my dreams.
And you just go back and do it. All right. So you don't write any outline, whatever.
That would give me hives. That would give me hives. And
you dream, huh?
I dream in chapters.
And is it
In color?
No.
all the time you dream?
Mm-hmm.
Because dreams come and go.
Mm-mm.
No.
Mm-mm.
So do you keep track of, you said on the spreadsheet, do you keep track of clues, and you said yes on clues?
Yes.
And so how do you spin off another group of books so that you don't get mixed in, or do they mix in?
Well, they'll have a bit of crossover, but in the spreadsheet, I have my world sheet, which is all the specifics about the town and main characters and shop names, and I have Lights Out Movie Theater that's in Pembroke Cove, and I have a fall festival that's in this book that happens in October, and it appears in the second Ghost and Gowns series. So I have that master, and then every book has its own sheet in that Google document. And then, but that's just one series. Every series has its own Google document with all kinds of information. But as I'm writing the book, I'm color coding the red herrings and the clues. So the red herring has to be convincing enough to make people think that they know who the killer is when it's really not. It's a lot of good misdirection. And then when I'm editing the book, which is what I'm doing right now with a different book, I'm editing it, which is not paranormal. It's more like she's an FBI analyst, but she's gone to baking because she just didn't want to live in that world anymore. And she just wanted to bake and be happy. So she inherits this house and she moves to a town called Oak Hollow. And she opens a bakery, and her bakery burns down. At the opening of the book, you know, I'm burning her bakery down, and somebody's in there, and they discover they have a corpse in there. And but he died. The fire didn't kill him. Somebody else did. So because there's no paranormal elements, and it's a completely different type of dialogue, you know, Temperance is highly educated, and she's lived in that FBI world where they talk differently than my witch who owns a bookstore in here. So I have to make sure that those spreadsheets are very, very exacting, and even character names. Like I discovered I used a character name in this series, and I went, oh, I have to change it over here. But when I'm actually editing the book, I'm keeping notes on a little steno pad next to my keyboard. So like very important key things, all right, in chapter 12, this happened. And I know it's important because I finished the book. So I have to go back and make sure that every place I've talked about that, it's all consistent. Because again, readers will tell you, I changed an eye color in one of these books of my main characters one time. And I got an email saying, no, 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 so-and-so has brown eyes, not blue eyes. And I'm like, okay, good to know. So I went back and fixed it. Because if they're taking the time to email you, it's important. And that's where I'm saying the cozy mysteries are really, those fans are just spot on.
Did you write books before you had data spreadsheets? Or when you started writing in earnest? Was it the time of spreadsheets already available?
No. Well, yes and no. I tried to write a children's story. Benjamin the Bunny and Blueberry Muffins. Benjamin shows up in the books, the first series, and so does Blueberry Muffins, by the way. But I sent it to an editor. And she said, this is terrible. And she said, way too descriptive. People don't care to know what this muffin tastes like. And I'm like, but Benjamin does. You know, in my mind, Benjamin did. And that was when my youngest was probably 3 or 4. So we're talking a couple days ago. We won't say how many. But, and I was devastated because, I mean, she really just ripped that world apart for me. She was not kind. And I don't, in my personal belief, I think if you're asking an editor to look at something, you don't have to be cruel. Because for somebody to have taken the time to put their heart into something, you can say, if you work on this, or if you work on this, or if you work on this, that's great. And you can elevate your story by doing that. But I don't think people should be mean to each other. And so I stopped. I wasn't going to ever write again. And of course, I dream in chapters. And I would tell my husband these wonderful stories. And he would be like, can you just write it down? And he wasn't a reader at all. He didn't want to read. He would listen to audiobooks of mine, but he didn't want to read a book. And so I would tell him, and he would be like, that's great, write it down. And I'm like, no, nobody's going to want to read this. He'd be like, yes, they will. Write it down. So I started writing, and I write really fast. It's like a fire hose. Did you ever see the movie Under the Tuscan Sun?
Yeah.
Okay. And you know how when the character, when she walks in and her arm bumps the water spigot and there's no water coming out. And then by the end of the movie, it's like a fire hydrant. That's how I write. I'm like on a fire. And the fire's just going to get put out by all of this water. Those are my words.
Have you ever sent any of your work to that first editor?
No, I don't even remember her name. I so blocked her out.
Yeah.
I just thought she was such a toxic person.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
They are, and there's no reason for it. So I just let it go.
Wow.
Once I realized, and when you publish a book, even if you don't like it, and there are books that I've read that I have not cared for, and if you ask me, like if you were the author and you said, what did you think of my book? I would find something I liked about it, not the cover, But inside, I would find, like, I really love that characterization. Your naming convention was clever. Your setting was wonderful. I would never hurt anybody like that because as authors, and it doesn't matter if you're indie published like I am or if you're traditionally published, they put their heart and soul into this. I mean, this takes hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. Just because you write a book, then you've got to edit, and then you proofread it, and then you send it to your editor, and then it comes back, and you edit it again, and then you send it out to your proofreader, and then it comes back, and you do it again. And then you set the book, and you read it again. So, that's a lot of effort and hours. And then I have a sister-in-law who reads word for word. I'm not a good word for word reader. And she'll highlight in my proof copy, and she'll say, this should be and, not an. And so she catches those little things for me. But every author who has the courage to publish a book should be applauded for their effort.
Absolutely.
So.
That's great.
We should have a Carolyn King Nancy fan club for women all over the country that started with her, the love of those boys.
Well, in this new series that I'm writing, the dress designer series, they actually call themselves Nancy and Bess.
I miss her still.
I kind of brought that into that because I wanted to pay homage to, this set of books that really, made me fall in love with mystery. The 99 Steps.
Right.
Those were important books. The Hardy Boys, Hidden Staircase, all of those. So.
In fact, I got a present from a friend, an old one, that she picked up somewhere. She said, are you going to read it? I said, yes, I'm going to read it. It was just a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
That's amazing.
So,
Amazing story.
do you guys want to hear a little bit of Books and Bribes? Pardon?
What month were you born?
June.
Gemini?
I am a Gemini. Kind of works, doesn't it?
Yeah, Scottish Gemini.
I'd like to hear a little of the cozy book.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can do that. I just need glasses. Now, this is paranormal cozy. So I have a witch, and I have a talking familiar named Milo, who is an absolute character.
Talking.
Familiar. He's a cat. His name is Milo. And he's a very important character in the book because he's really sarcastic and funny. And he's a great foil for her when, like, later in the book, he'll say, I'll help you for smoked salmon. And she'll be like, smoked salmon? And he'll be like, mm-hmm. Like, I'm not going to help you unless you give me smoked salmon. Or, he doesn't want to eat dry kibble anymore. So she has to up her ante, as they're developing. And in Cookies and Capers, which is the prequel, the free book that I have, it's how she adopts him. And how she thinks the whole time that she saved him. And we find out in Artifacts and Amulets that he's been waiting for her for centuries. So it was kind of fun. So yeah, we have some fun stuff going on here. Okay, so this is Books and Bribes. This is book 1 of the Bookstore Cozy Mystery. And Lily is, in my mind, she's like in her late 30s, maybe 38, 39 years old. And she has some really good friends, and she has an Aunt Mimi, who is lovely. And think of her like a modern-day Jessica Fletcher, but Aunt Mimi's a witch. Achoo! A thick cloud of dust flew up from the pages of the hefty book that had fallen off the shelf. It barely missed my head as it hit the floor with a thump. I stumbled backward and let out a scream as I tried desperately to catch myself on anything before falling. A sandpaper-like sensation scraped over my cheek as I lay on the wooden floor, and I slowly opened my eyes. There was Milo, my gray tabby cat, hovering over me. I scratched his long, soft fur. Hey, little man, I'm okay. Just took a tumble. I eased myself to a sitting position and gently rubbed the back of my head where it had connected with the floor. Not a great way to end a Monday. A deep, gravelly voice said, You've been lying there for several minutes out cold. I didn't think you'd ever wake up. I looked around. Who's there? My heart rate increased as I scrambled to my feet and grabbed the heavy book. As I hurried down the aisle of the bookshop, scanning right and left, I wondered who was in my store. I was certain I had locked the front door at 4 on the dot after my last customer left. I checked the empty sitting area in the front of the oversized north-facing windows. It was comprised of 2 wingback chairs, a small table between them, and a round table in front of them. It had great natural light for reading, but I was alone. Shaking my head gingerly, I surmised it must be the residual effect from hitting my head. Glancing at the fat black book in my hand, Practical Beginnings, I decided I'd find a place for this tomorrow. Walking back to the wide wooden counter, I dropped it on the top and stroked Milo's soft fur. Ready to go home? My besties were meeting me at the library for classic movie night. Tonight was Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie, and I didn't want to be late. I locked the cash register when I heard a scratchly but kind voice say, "Ready when you are." With a stapler in my hand, I twirled around, shaking it in the air. "I demand you show yourself." "Lily, it's me, your old buddy Milo." "Stop it, right now." Who was in my shop? "Look at your cat," the voice urged. My heart thudded in my chest. Was something wrong with my sweet baby? Milo? I scooped him into my arms and held him tight. "Need to breathe." He squirmed in my arms and escaped to the counter. I stumbled back against the long table stacked with bestsellers. Some dropped to the floor as my weight sagged against it. "Did you just speak?" The words came out as a croak. "I've been waiting for you to open and read that book for ages. Remember, Aunt Mimi asked you to read it on your last birthday." I nodded, dumbfounded. This couldn't be happening. I could hear him, but his tiny mouth wasn't moving. I lifted my hand and grazed the slight bump on the back of my head. My cat was talking to me. Wait, I must have hit my head harder than I thought, or worse, had something possessed me? I rubbed the back of my head again. Ouch! No, I must be concussed. I walked around the room, checking to make sure the windows were secured, and double-checked the front door was locked. Yep, all tight as a drum. We already knew that. Once again, it was that same voice. My legs jiggled like rubber. I dropped to the chair and put my head between my legs, just in case I felt faint. After a few seconds, I sat up. This was stupid. I was having a conversation with a prankster. "Milo, if you're really talking to me, come over and sit down in this other chair." I watched as he walked to the edge of the counter and dropped to the floor, only to hop in the chair opposite me. This couldn't be happening. No way he understood. Licking his front paw and rubbing it above his eye, he said, "Now do you believe me?" "For my next parlor trick." "So that you'll believe me?" "Tell me what I'm thinking." I leaned closer, giving him full access to my face. This close proximity would help me see if his mouth was moving. "I'm not telepathic. I'm your familiar, and yes, that means you're a witch." Finally, the truth is out. He stretched over the cushion and rolled on his back as if I was supposed to scratch his tummy. "Feel free." Like when Milo always rolled over, I obliged by scratching his belly, and his eyes would close in contentment. But this time, he was giving me directions where I should be scratching. "If you're going to be bossy, I'm done." I went to stand up and drop back to the chair. "Wait, what did you just say about being a witch? I own a bookshop. There is nothing special about me." My cat opened his eyes and he rolled over to his side, never bothering to blink. "You can believe that nothing special. But a few witches live in Pembroke Cove, and you're one of them." Once again, I felt as if I had fallen from the stool and conked my head, but I was sitting on a comfy chair, talking with my cat, who just announced I was a witch. Wait! My thoughts were spinning. Does that mean Aunt Mimi is one too? Stop repeating yourself, and now you're catching on. Milo jumped to the floor and looked up. "I thought you said we were going home." "I'm hungry." My breath came rapidly and my head swam. This couldn't be happening. I must be dreaming. As I bent over to put my head between my knees, which seemed to be the thing to do, a tapping on the glass in the door drew my attention. Who on earth would stop by now? I looked at my watch. It was almost 5. Again came the insistent knocking. I got to my feet, albeit unsteadily, and waited until I felt I could plaster a smile on my face before going to the door. When I peeked out, relief washed over me and my breathing slowed. Why was I being a nervous Nellie? Must be all this talk of familiars and witches. With a glance over my shoulder, I jabbed my finger in Milo's direction. Shush! No one can hear me. When I talk, all they hear is a cute little meow coming from my tiny mouth. I frowned. Tiny is debatable at this point. I pulled open the door. The minute I saw his handsome face and the dreamy hazel eyes, my knees went weak. It was one of my oldest and dearest friends, who also was the guy I'd been in love with my entire life, Gage Erickson. Hi there. I was expecting to see you later at the library. Gage walked in and looked around. I thought I heard you talking. Are you alone? Heat flushed my cheeks. This wasn't something I was about to share with anyone. Having a conversation with a cat and the cat talking back? I forced a grin and added an extra dose of cheeriness to my voice. Just talking to Milo. There's no one else here. Gage bent over and scratched between the kitty's ears. Instead of a purr, I heard, that feels good. Thanks, Detective Cutie. There was no reaction from the man, so at least there was that. Milo opened one eye, and I could swear the cat winked at me. Gage, what brings you around? Did you want to drive to the movie together? I clamped my mouth shut. That sounded way too much like a date. I didn't want anything to make our friendship awkward, so I rushed ahead with, Nikki and Steve are meeting us there, and oh, maybe Aunt Mimi and Nate O'Brien. Sounds like it's going to be a packed house. He looked at me while he scooped up Milo to continue giving the kitty attention. I guess. Seeing Gage hold Milo was like kryptonite to me, causing my heart to do all kinds of crazy flips. Anyone who loves someone else's cat had to be a keeper, right? I sighed, and his brow quirked. You okay? Oh, yes. I fell off the stool earlier and hit my head. Concern filled his eyes. He deposited Milo in the chair and took a step in my direction. Where did you hit it? My hand went to the tender spot on the back. I'm fine. Turn around so I can take a look. I did as he asked, enjoying being fussed over a little, but not wanting to appear like some weak girl who needed his attention, like those girls at the coffee shop. They were always giggling whenever he walked in, especially when he used to wear his police officer's uniform. He pushed ever so slightly on the spot that had connected with the floor, and tears sprang to my eyes as I cried out, Ouch! That hurts! His laugh was comforting. Guess I found the spot. You should put ice on it and take it easy for tonight. I turned back to face him. I can't miss the movie. It's one of my favorites. Mine, too, but that's why I stopped by. I can't make it tonight. I have to cover a shift from Mac Sullivan. His wife's gone into labor, and we're short a man. That's exciting. About the new baby, I mean, not about you working. I had to hold my disappointment in check again, so as not to appear as anything more than a friend. We'll miss having you there to chow down on popcorn and red licorice. Gently he tucked a stray lock of hair behind my ear, a motion he had done 1,000 times. But it made my heart race. I kept my eyes glued to the old oriental carpet in the middle of the room. No way was I going to let him see my eyes. He was way too perceptive and would see how I felt about him, which I have spent years hiding. Maybe I'll swing by tomorrow around 10 with coffee? When I looked in his eyes, I wondered if I saw a flicker of hope that I would say yes, which I would about anything. Dang it, in my head I sounded like a freshman in high school with a crush on the football star. That'd be great, but if you're bringing coffee, any chance you can get one of those pecan buns, you know, with extra icing? Is that why you're asking if I'll stop at the sweet spot? Well, you offered, and William makes the best pastries in 3 towns. I playfully batted my eyelashes just because I could, and knew it always made him laugh. Right on cue, he grinned. That can be arranged. His cell rang, and he glanced at the screen. I gotta go. Judy calls. He dropped an almost kiss on my cheek on the way out the door and called over his shoulders, See you in the morning, and then was gone. A long sigh escaped my body. Milo said, Really? Do you think he does not know that you're into him? Turning my back at him, I said, I will not start talking to my cat about my love life. Milo trotted in the direction where I stored his cat carrier. You mean your non-existent love life, don't you? Milo? I meant for it to come out as a warning to hush up, but it sounded more like a question to my ears. Do you think Gage knows I have a crush on him? Yeah, and if you opened your eyes, you might see the feeling is mutual. When I finally got to the library a little after 6, the usual group had gathered in the community room to watch the film. My best friend Nikki was there with her boyfriend Steve. My aunt was there with Nate. Marshall Stone was running the projector, and Teddy Roberts and Jill Dilly were there too. The group was rounded out with a few teenagers from the high school and a couple of new faces. Typically, there would be a few more stragglers before the film actually got started. This was shaping up to be a fun evening. I waved to Meredith across the room, one of the librarians who worked there. She was a quiet woman with a long blonde braid down her back and round wired-rimmed glasses, giving her a studious look. With a shy smile, she returned my wave and looked at her boss, the head librarian, Flora Gray. She was bustling about, making snide comments about tomorrow she'd be vacuuming up popcorn, candy wrappers, and heaven only knows what else from the floor. She was not a fan of movie night. Flora? I stopped her as I helped set up the chairs. Why don't you join us tonight? It's a classic Agatha Christie. Her eyes narrowed and she glared at me. I'm a librarian. That fact should be enough to explain. I prefer books over any other form of entertainment, especially when it's in black and white. She lifted her chin as disdain dripped from her words. She didn't need to be so snarky. I was trying to include you so you could see what a wonderful group of people attend. Meredith passed by, her arms loaded with books. Flora, you know the movies buffs always leave the room immaculate. I don't think there's any need to be so harsh on Lily. Flora gave Meredith a withering look, and she hurried to the other side of the library. Flora wiggled a large key ring in front of me. I'll give this to your aunt, and she can lock everything up. But I'll be back later tonight to check on things. Everything had best be in place. And for once, clean up after yourselves. She pointed to the dish of hard candies on the side table. Get rid of those. They draw ants. I didn't understand where she was coming from. Our group had never left a mess. In fact, we cleaned the restrooms and the small kitchenette every month. It was odd she pinpointed the candy dish, so I did not know who brought it. But it didn't matter. The place would be spotless before we locked up. Don't worry, Flora. I'll make sure everything is clean and tidy. She jabbed a finger that almost touched my chest. See that you do. I watched the older woman march out of the room. Through the doorway, I kept an eye on her just in case she came back for round 2. Her short, steeled gray hair was in a no-nonsense style. She always dressed exactly the same way, a starch white blouse, a horsehead brooch, and black slacks with sturdy tie shoes. In the winter, she added a fisherman knit sweater to stave off the stiff ocean breeze as she biked from her home to the library. Even in the snow, she still biked. I could never figure out how, since the winds off the water were enough to push a car around, let alone the biker. I often thought she looked like the Wicked Witch from The Wizard of Oz riding her bike in the tornado. But it was none of my business. At least I took comfort in knowing she treated everyone the same as me. She was an old biddy who thought she was doing the town a favor by letting groups hold events there. At one time, Flora had tried to put an end to our gathering, even though she was on the board of elders. The rest of the group had reminded her it was a public space, and the community-minded groups could use it as long as it was posted to the schedule. Pushing all thoughts aside, I turned my attention to Nikki, my best friend for life. We were complete opposites. She had long strawberry blonde hair, while mine was dark and a pixie cut. Her ears were blue and mine were brown, and we always had each other's back. She held up the DVD for Marshall to see. As she grew closer and smiled at me, she asked, "What did the old bat complain about tonight?" Marshall looked at us and said in his best Sherlock Holmes voice, "Fair to say, everything. I swear, how can someone as cantankerous as her even want to live in our fair town?" Standing over 6 feet and strong as an ox, he owned and worked a vegetable farm on the outskirts of town. Years in the sun had left him with deep creases in his weather-worn face. Marshall had been running the projector for the last 5 years. Like everyone in Pembroke Cove, it seemed, he experienced at least one run-in with Flora. The last time she'd been downright vicious when she thought he had broken the projector. It turned out that was all wrong. He had unplugged it at the end of the night. People had taken their seats and the lights had just shut off when I heard Aunt Mimi scream, "Help! Somebody help!" Can you guess who's dead?
Sure.
So as you can see, a lot was layered into that first chapter. The world building, the suspects are all there. So one of those people definitely killed her. We just don't know who yet or why, but you can see she really was not a friendly person. And that's a hallmark of a cozy mystery.
No, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Very good.